Welcome to SAM Conversation. I'm Tarun Basu, and in this episode, which is going to be a little different from the kind of events we do, we are going to talk about Sri Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans, one of the most revered saint philosophers of this country, and arguably one of the most celebrated mystics of his time in 18th century Bengal, which is also known as the era of the Bengal Renaissance, which gave birth to a whole lot of national and celebrated figures from Raja Ram Mohan Roy to Rabindranath Tagore. The main fundamental philosophy of Thakur Ramakrishna was that the salvation should be the goal of all living beings, and that can be done through self-realization. He was a force of revival in Hinduism at a time when Hinduism was on the wane, and yet his influence was transcended all faiths and was respected by people of all religions. He sought to experience divinity in a host of different ways, and he had his experiences with Islam, with Christianity, with Buddhism and Sikhism, and it was through all these experiences, it was the result of all these experiences that came out with this dictum, Yato Mat, Tato Pat. There are different ways to reach divinity, but all paths are more or less the same. The fundamentals of his teaching was the harmony of religions, and Dakshineswar, outside Calcutta, where he was the chief priest for several decades after, and he became the priest after his brother Ram Kumar died. It was often called the Parliament of Religions. He was the inspiration behind the Ramakrishna Mission, spiritual order, whose humanitarian and activities have a global reach and recognition. To speak about much of this, we have today a very distinguished panel. Foremost among them is Professor Sreemati Mukherjee, who's at the Department of Performing Arts, Kolkata University. She's the author of this book, The Many Dialogues of Sri Sri Ramakrishna Kathamrita. She's also a Fulbright scholar, and she will make the opening remarks. But also among the panelists is Ambassador Amit Dasgupta, former Indian ambassador and an educationist, who's now a strategic advisor to the University of New South Wales, UNSW Australia. We also have joining from Pune, Anil Rajvanshi, who calls himself a spiritual engineer. He is also an IIT educated and engineer who has taught in the University of Florida, and now he's doing a lot of work in the area of renewable energy and sustainable development with the NIMCAR Agricultural Research Institute in Fulton, Maharashtra. And he's done a lot of studies on Sri Sri Ramakrishna. And if I might also add, Anil, he's written a lot of articles on the intersection of spiritualism and technology. So, Professor Mukherjee, I'll start with you. And since we have a lot of young viewers, on South Asia watchers here, I would like you to tell our viewers who is the real Sri Sri Ramakrishna. How is his views, 18th century saint and mystics views, relevant today? And what are its relevance to the contemporary world? And why did you write this book, and why in English? Professor Mukherjee, please.
Okay. So I think I'll start with a kind of personal anecdote. That is, I went to America when I was not quite 22. I was a student's wife, and we hit upon very bad days. And then one very cold winter evening, we went to the Vedanta Society of New York. I remember walking into the chapel and seeing the familiar picture of Sri Ramakrishna, and I felt at home. My family had no interface with Ramakrishna. There were Kali worshippers in my house, but there was no Ramakrishna tradition or continuum or anything of the sort. I've been thinking about this. I've been wondering why Sri Ramakrishna is, why he continues to be an enduring, why he continues to be popular and accepted and loved by, by a wide range of intellects. Not that everybody who's a Ramakrishna worshipper, it really understands him at a very subtle and nuanced level, but people love him. Well, it's his simplicity. He's dressed very simply. He speaks a very simple kind of language, although it can be extremely subtle and philosophically nuanced. And I think his central message, I mean, if you, I think you asked something about why, is he still relevant? And if so, why, etc. It's because he emphasizes lack of ego, lack of self consistently. If there is a mantra in Sri Ramakrishna, it is give up the self. Give up the self. And he cites numerous instances from the scriptures and from daily life. Like he says, like if one wears boots, because those were days of colonial existence in Bengal. So he gives the example of a young man wearing boots. And he says that if this young man wears boots that are normally worn by British, then he develops a kind of swagger and a kind of air, So the one thing that Sri Ramakrishna has continually drawn attention to, he says, Maya is the ego, the scum that covers the clear water of Brahman, of Sachidananda. Is Maya, and Maya equals ego. So if we can somehow bypass Maya with love and prem and bhav, then we might be able to be more at peace with ourselves and with other people. I think I'll sort of stop here for others to continue, say whatever they would.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee, for those introductory remarks. I'll just say that when you started, you said everything in the present tense, that he's very simple and he's very austere in his habits and all. Why did you say everything in the present tense? After all, Thakur Ramakrishna died in 1856, if I'm not mistaken, long ago, and everything was, you started off in the saying everything in the present tense about him and his habits. Why was that?
Yeah, because I'm in the present tense, Mr. Basu, and I being a person who uses her intellect all the time, I do that for a living. I don't want to sound pretentious, but that is true. So I have to ask myself continually, why is it that I like Sri Ramakrishna so much? I have to ask myself that question. And while writing this book, these were the questions that I confronted repeatedly and tried to look for answers deep down within my own psyche.
All right. I'll now come to Ambassador Dasgupta. Amit, we've known each other for a long time, and I know you have served in many parts of the world. And as you know, Ramakrishna Mission has been there in Moscow, all major cities of the world. What is it in your various postings as a diplomat? Like, Professor Mukherjee talked about her experience in the Vedanta Society in New York. What is it that you, experienced in your various postings of the Ramakrishna Mission and the message and the fundamental message that Thakur Paramahansa and his disciple Swami Vivekananda had for the world?
Thank you, Tarun, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this panel discussion. Sreemati's book is a very evocative book. It's an academic book, but I think she brings out a lot of the critical nuances in trying to understand a person, which is normally very difficult. And I cannot say that my family has had a long association with the Ramakrishna Mission, but in our home, my father was a worshipper also of the goddess Kali, But we did visit the Ramakrishna Mission several times, and I have had the opportunity of visiting Ramakrishna missions and the monks in different parts of the world. Several things stood out about them. And there I'd like to go back to Sreemati, because she was talking about how Sri Ramakrishna wanted us to abandon self and wanted us to move away from self, which he thought was actually going to hold us down, and perhaps not allow us to understand the difference between what is and what appears to be. And there I wanted to request Sreemati to explain to me two concepts. One is the Christians talk in terms of immersion. And they say that you need to immerse yourself in Christ. And what you see around you when you do that is Christ. Everything around you, it then becomes Christ. And I think in Hindu philosophy and what Sri Ramakrishna was doing, the life that he led, he saw the goddess everywhere. And my question to Sreemati is, how do you explain the word Ananda? How does the word Ananda translate itself in your mind? When does a person experience Ananda?
Amit, that's so nice to meet you here. Thank you. You're the first person who broached the idea of this Adda. So I thank you and thank Mr. Basu for having invited me to this. I forgot to do these, I forgot to say these things. Well, it's like this, that when Sri Ramakrishna was about 6 years old, he was crossing a field and he saw a group of cranes fly across the dark sky. The sky was slowly becoming overcast with clouds. And it was such an incredibly beautiful sight that he fainted with the wonder of it all. So when the Romantic poets describe romantic feeling, they usually speak about a sense of wonder. And I would locate that sense of wonder as the rasa adbhuta of the 9 rasas of our Natya Shastra system. So Ananda, it's very simple. Sukh is personal. Sukh is towards the self, whereas Ananda is impersonal. While I look out of my window and see a beautiful fruit that has blossomed on a tree, I feel an incredible joy, but that has no self. It's not directed towards myself in any kind of way. So Sri Ramakrishna, when his body was incredibly wasted by cancer, he suddenly says to Swamiji and to other people who were present there, he says, oh, I just see this. I see that God is the altar, God is the sacrifice, and God is the one who is making the sacrifice. You know, so imagine that in a state of such physical debility, he had the ability to distance himself and remove himself from his excruciating physical condition to marvel at a certain fusing of object and subject in a certain realization and feel happy about it. So this is Ananda, Dada. This is Ananda. This is immersion. That you're immersed in the object where yourself and the object fuse and coalesce. And there is no sense of a selfish I interposing anywhere.
Thank you. I'll bring in Anil now, Anil Rajvanshi from Paltan, Maharashtra. Anil, when did you get introduced to Thakur Paramahansa's teachings? Because you have written quite a bit about him and Swami Vivekananda, and and lately you have been writing about the intersection of spirituality and technology. So how have the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna Mission influenced you personally and your work?
First of all, thank you, Tarun, for inviting me. I'm really happy for that. I was introduced to Ramakrishna Paramhans at the age of 13. I there were certain events in my life, and I read his book at the age of 13. I was so inspired, and this process has continued. And at the back of my mind, his teachings and Vivekananda's teachings have always remained. In fact, all my spiritual writings, I have used extensively his simple stories and parables. Now, I would also like to tell you that I did not have the access to the book of Sreemati Mukherjee, so I cannot comment directly on it. But since I have been inspired by Sri Ramakrishna and his teachings, so I will say something about him. Now, Ramakrishna's teachings, as you rightly said, are mostly known through Vivekananda and also through the good work of Ramakrishna Paramhans, or Ramakrishna Mission. In fact, his teachings are not so well known as Vivekananda's. But if you go through the Vivekananda's writings, then actually he talks all the time about his guru, and then to understand that. And what attracted me to his writings was his teaching that all religions of the world are different paths to the same goal of finding truth and happiness is extremely relevant today in this polarized and divisive world, which is true everywhere. So if we follow his teachings that they are different paths, but the goal for happiness and truth is same, then I think the world will become much better. And he understood this truth by direct perception. You know, he was a very illiterate person. He had no, no education, no intellectual leading, but everything that he did was a direct perception because he had a terrific, powerful mind, and he felt that anybody who understands properly Hindu, Christian, or Muslim religion in its deepest sense, then he or she can become a good human being, and that is for better for mankind. And I think this is a great lesson for the modern times, for the youngsters, that we need to think on a much bigger issue rather than a very, very narrow issue of religion. So he taught his truth by the experiences, by his direct perception, and hence through the medium of bhakti and yoga and faith. In fact, he was a great proponent of bhakti yoga. I also feel that he was not of this, but from someone else who came to the to teach us universal consciousness. And that is something which will teachings and his sayings are universal and for all times. Some of his mystical visions, these are discussing, not explain them, talk about them, and experience.
Well, I think
I'm not a scientist, hence I feel a lot of these visions.
I think we are losing a bit and your voice is breaking. So maybe, we'll come back to you later. Now, Professor Mukherjee,
Okay.
I would like to, we talked about this Jato Mat Tato Pot, this whole philosophy of pluralism, this whole, we keep talking about the India's syncretic culture, which is now, observed more in its breach. How relevant is what he taught, these teachings, especially on that all paths lead to one God and divinity is one, but there are several paths that leading to it. How relevant is that today, and why is it not being followed? Teaching, but don't follow it.
Yeah, well, so are we really dividing the world into those who are Ramakrishna followers and those who are not? It's not, we're not doing that.
No, we're not doing that.
We're not doing that. So, well, I would say that, even if you have a mission and even though you have many people being formally initiated into the Ramakrishna mantra, what Sri Ramakrishna asks for is extremely difficult to do, which is why religion fails, Mr. Basu. To my entire panel, I am addressing the entire panel. Religion fails because what we are asked to do is, we are naturally selfish and we like ourselves very much, and we like to pamper our desires, minor ones, major ones, medium ones. We're not naturally given to really being solicitous about other people. There are degrees, of course. Thakur used to say that Shakti Bishesh, that because he believed in Shakti philosophy, I mean, he certainly believed in Shakti philosophy, that there were degrees of power. I mean, not everyone was equally empowered. When Vidyashabur said, why do you mean to say that there are variations of power amongst people? Then he said, then why have we come to see you? We've come to see you because you are such a Mahan Pandit. That's why we've come. In fact, he said, আপনার কি দুটো সিংহ দিয়েছে যে আপনাকে দেখতে এসেছি? That is what he said. So the thing is that, going back to your question, that this selflessness, look, this Jotomat Tatopat actually stems from Sri Ramakrishna's not training, I would not use the word training, but his understanding of non-dualistic religion, which is Vedanta, which was taught to him by Totapuri, the Naga sannyasi from Punjab. So he practiced that sadhana for about 6 months, around the time 1864, 1865, 1863. And this sense of an indivisible, indissoluble world, indivisible, undifferentiated world, gave him the sense of everybody, everything being equal. You know, the Upanishads, the concept, the concept of Brahman is that Brahman inheres in everything, even in this desk, in this mouse, in a bottle, in a picture, in everything. It's sentient and non-sentient beings. So the thing is that it is his training, you could say, his experience of non-dualistic spiritual practice that deepened, or that generated within him this sense of the oneness of existence. And another thing about Sri Ramakrishna is that he felt that man did not create religion. When I use man, I would rather say human being did not create religion. It was God who created religion. This is something he adhered to. And therefore, we were not in a position to say this is right and this is wrong, or this is whatever, ferret out qualifications in other people's religions. That you practice what you can, have the firm belief that the man who practices, or the human being, the person who practices something else, is also leading him or her to the same goal as you are walking towards. So that is this Joto Mat Toto Pop. That that somebody calls it water, somebody calls it pani, someone calls it jol, but it's actually just water.
Just water. You know, a sentence that struck me in your book, The Many Dialogues of Sri Sri Ramakrishna, was, I'm just reading it out, his brilliant evocative teaching, although ostensibly unlettered, his revolutionary pluralism, his splendid powers of narration, metaphor creation and usage, an extraordinary ability to fuse song with philosophy, provide a spectacular range of personality, and one of the widest reaches of impact in terms of society, culture, religion, and spirituality, which led to the birth of an era called the era of Ramakrishna, which made possible the founding of the Ramakrishna Mission, the spiritual order. Now, I would, we don't have too much time. I would like you to sum up his philosophy and how this era of Ramakrishna led to the founding of the spiritual order called the Ramakrishna Mission, which today everybody is familiar with.
Mr. Basu, somebody was calling, so I missed just the very last bit of the sentence. Could you please call it out again, if you don't mind?
I'm just quoting from your book, page 110 about the spectacular range of personality and on the widest reaches in terms of society culture, which led to the birth of an era that may be called the era of Ramakrishna, which made possible the founding of one of the greatest Indian spiritual orders in modern times, the Ramakrishna mission.
Okay, I have the answer to that, and I'm so happy I'm getting a chance to say it. You know, all of you gentlemen, on a particular day when the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita was being read out to Sri Ramakrishna, for the Vaishnavas, three things are very important. They are Jibe, Daya, Vaishnav, Prem, Nam, Sankirtan, which means compassion towards others, Nam Sankirtan, and Vaishnav Prem, love of other Vaishnavas. Sri Ramakrishna was listening, and whenever I listened to exalted stuff like this, he would sort of lose his very physical consciousness and enter a kind of, what should I say, a somewhat transcending the absolute physicality of existence, anyway, of living. So he said, Ke kare doya kare, bolo, Shiva Gyane Jibo Shiva, which is who, this is what he always said. Who are you to show compassion? He said that to Bankim Chandra. When Bankim Chandra said, sir, why did you throw the money away? So much social work can be done with the help of money. He said, who are you to show compassion to human beings? When a man sleeps, even if somebody urinates near his mouth, he can't do anything about it. So that's the limit of your power. Know him first. Be empowered by him, then go and do your social service. And that only if you can do it in the spirit of great impersonality, then is social service worth it. So let's get back to that. Ke kare doya kare, who shows compassion to whom? Instead say, worship Jiva as Shiva. Worship Jiva, human being, as though you were worshipping Shiva. That, in the words of Swami Vivekananda, became Atmano mokshartam jagadhitayacha, which is, I will work for my own salvation and I will also work for the benefit of mankind. Atmano mokshartam jagadhitayacha. These are the twin mottos of the Ramakrishna mission, Mr. Basu, that we cultivate a life of renunciation, austerity, and rectitude. And at the same time, we do not retire to the jungle or to monasteries or to mountains and simply follow a path of intense sadhana directed just towards, just focused on our own goal. No, we stay in the world and we help humankind. Because Sri Ramakrishna used to quote Shankaracharya a great deal. And he said that the greatest savants are those who come back after samadhi, who come back after knowledge of Brahman and stay back to give lok shikha, to help humankind. That helping humankind is very important to Sri Ramakrishna, and that becomes the highest motto of the Ramakrishna mission. I think I've been able to tie that up.
Thank you. Anil, would you like to say something on this, to add something to this? And then I would like, after you finish, to Amit to round up our discussion and conclude this session.
See, first of all, we should put some things in perspective. Ramakrishna Paramhans was a person endowed with a fantastic, powerful, and very supple brain. He actually was a great yogi in terms of Patanjali Yoga, and he could think about anything and produce the solution. So, and he was the prisoner of his time. So when he was taught all these things, he was trying to create from those things what is easiest thing that he can teach to the people. And that is why his parables, which are so simple, but those parables and stories found truth of his great mind. And I feel that if the scientists and others have understood what he was saying. Hello, can you hear me?
No, your voice is again cracking. We'll come back later, maybe later. But Amit, I would like to. We are running short of time, Anil. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's all right, but because my battery is also dying.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Amit, would you like to come in and conclude these discussions? And
Yeah,
I want to add something. This whole thing was supposed to be this book discussion on this many dialogues of the Sri Ramakrishna. And largely, one of the reasons I kind of made this introduction about who is Thakur Ramakrishna and what is his message, because, we have a kind of a global audience, and many of the people today really don't know who he is and his essence of this message and how it is relevant today. So that's why I brought in that, and I'm glad there has been a good discussion on that. And I would like Amit to now round up this discussion and give what and talk about the underlying message of this book and of the Thakur Paramahansa.
Thank you, Torun. I wanted to say at the outset that despite some technical and sound glitches, this has been a very fascinating discussion. And I think Sreemati's book on Sri Ramakrishna is a peg on which it is possible for us to look at multiple philosophical traditions and multiple great thinkers, mystics that have lived over time. I've been studying a lot about Zen Buddhism recently, and when you spoke with Srimati, what she said was that one of the things about Sri Ramakrishna was the simplicity with which he spoke. He spoke, I think, if I may put it this way, in every man's language. So that simplicity allowed his message to be understood by many people across the board. And you did not need excessive amount of erudition and knowledge to understand what he was trying to say. Of course, Srimati also added that while he was simple in what he said, there were nuances which were much deeper. Many of the Zen Buddhist monks, for example, speak in riddles. If you ask them a question, they reply with a riddle. And you need to figure out that riddle to be able to understand what they're saying. I'm not saying that they are any less powerful in the messages that they deliver. But I do believe that today's discussion brings into sharp focus a series of things. First, how do we actually see ourselves as individuals? When Srimati said that it's a matter of self-realization, I think it's very powerful for us to ask ourselves that when we look at the mirror, is this who we really are? Or is this who we pretend to be? And I think that was the first critical issue that has engaged many students and many mystics across the globe over centuries. Who am I? Is a fascinating philosophical inquiry, isn't it? And it's a question that is still not answered. Who am I? The second, I think, is practice. Is once you start realizing that you are a bundle of what people say is Maya, that you are actually caught up in a world of fabrication and illusion, and accept that this fabrication and illusion is reality, and you start to shed them, do you actually seek salvation or become a better person just by yourself? I think the jury is not out on this. Some of us may wish to be a better person before we can actually help other people. But I think there are two issues over here. Compassion is helping people. For example, Mother Teresa. People would say was a very compassionate person. But her home for the dying is not really a home where people are seeking spiritual help. They were actually seeking permission, if you like, to die early and painlessly. I think the whole series of questions that Anil has raised, you have raised, Torun, and Srimati has responded to, but also raised, need to be looked at in greater depth and detail. Mahayana Buddhism, for example, would say that you can purify yourself only when you also purify other people, which means it's not just a matter of seeking salvation for yourself, which is finding yourself, discarding Maya, but helping others do the same. So I would personally submit that Sri Ramakrishna, Gautama Buddha, Swami Vivekananda, there are so many who actually talk about the same thing in different ways. It's like Sri Ramakrishna had said, if you drop a pebble in a pool, which is reflecting the moon, you will actually see multiple moons, but that's an illusion, because at the end of the day, it is only one moon who's reflected in multiple ways. So this would be, I think, my humble take on what's been discussed.
Thank you so much. And I think we had a very great discussion. I'll just end this discussion and very enlightening discussion with this line again from Srimati's book. The range and breadth of Sri Ramakrishna is vast and fairly unmappable. And the same kind of wonder that he felt on seeing God's creations, one feels in the face of the sheer fecundity and endlessness of his imagination, story of stories, songs and application of spiritual principles to real life stories. The spectacular range leads to the spectacular resonance of the text. And that, in a way, sums up the whole essence of Sri Ramakrishna's message. And so with this, I thank you all for participating in this discussion. I think it was a very enlightening discussion, and we all learned a lot and from each other. And I'm sure that we will be able to renew this discussion at another time. And because it's very difficult to encapsulate the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna in just 25 minutes or 30 minutes. It would need several such discussions to bring out the essence of his teaching. So thank you all. And
thank you. Thank you. Had a wonderful time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.